Hey guys, we are starting 4th Maccabees today. This is the longest of 4 Maccabees. We're just going to read chapters 1 through 4 today. Okay. 4th Maccabees, chapter 1. The subject that I'm about to discuss is most philosophical. That is, whether devout reason is sovereign over the emotions, so it is right for me to advise you to pay earnest attention to philosophy. For the subject is essential to everyone who is seeking knowledge, and in addition, it includes the praise of the highest virtue, of course, rational judgment. If then it is evident that reason rules over those emotions that hinder self control, namely gluttony and lust, it is also clear that it masters the emotions that hinder one from justice, such as malice, and those that stand in the way of courage, namely anger, fear, and pain. Some might perhaps ask, if reason rules the emotions, why is it not sovereign over forgetfulness and ignorance? Their attempt at argument is ridiculous. For reason does not rule its own emotions, but those that are opposed to justice, courage, and self control, and it is not for the purpose of destroying them, but so that one may not give way to them. I could prove to you from many and various examples that reason is dominant over the emotions. Whoa, scrolled too far, way too far. Where did I? But I can demonstrate it is best from the noble bravery of those who died for the sake of virtue, Eleazar and the 7 brothers and their mother. All of these, by despising sufferings that bring death, demonstrated that reason controls the emotions. On this anniversary, it is fitting for me to praise for their virtues those who, with their mother, died for the sake of nobility and goodness. I would also call them blessed for the honor in which they are held. All people, even their torturers, marveled at their courage and endurance, and they became the cause of the downfall of tyranny over the nation. By their endurance, they conquered the tyrant, and thus their native land was purified through them. I shall shortly have an opportunity to speak of this, but as my custom is, I shall begin by stating my main principle, and then I shall turn to their story, giving glory to the all-wise God. Our inquiry, accordingly, is whether reason is sovereign over the emotions. We shall decide just what reason is and what emotion is, how many kinds of emotions there are, and whether reason rules over all these. Now, reason is the mind that, with sound logic, prefers the life of wisdom. Wisdom, next, is the knowledge of divine and human matters and the causes of these. This, in turn, is education and the law by which we learn divine matters reverently and human affairs to our advantage. Now, the kinds of wisdom are rational judgment, justice, courage, and self control. Rational judgment is supreme over all these, since by means of it, reason rules over the emotions. The two most comprehensive types of the emotions are pleasure and pain, and each of these is by nature concerned with both body and soul. The emotions of both pleasure and pain have many consequences. Thus, desire precedes pleasure and delight follows it. Fear precedes pain and sorrow comes after. Anger, as a person will see by reflecting on this experience, is an emotion embracing pleasure and pain. In pleasure, there exists even a malevolent tendency, which is the most complex of all the emotions. In the soul, it is boastfulness, covetousness, thirst for honor, rivalry, and malice. In the body, indiscriminate eating, gluttony, and solitary gormanizing. Just as pleasure and pain are two plants growing from the body and the soul, so there are many offshoots of these plants, each of which the master cultivator reason weeds and prunes and ties up and waters and thoroughly irrigates, and so tames the jungle of habits and emotions. For reason is the guide of the virtues, but over the emotions it is sovereign. Observe now, first of all, the rational judgment is sovereign over the emotions by virtue of the restraining power of self-control. Self-control, then, is dominance over the desires. Some desires are mental, others are physical, and reason obviously rules over both. Otherwise, how is it that when we are attracted to forbidden foods, we abstain from the pleasure to be had from them? Is it not because reason is able to rule over appetites? I, for one, think so. Therefore, When we crave seafood and fowl and animals and all sorts of foods that are forbidden to us by the law, we abstain because of domination by reason. For the emotions of the appetite are restrained, checked by the temperate mind, and all the impulses of the body are bridled by reason. Chapter 4th Maccabees Chapter 2. And why is it amazing that the desires of the mind for the enjoyment of beauty are rendered powerless? It is for this reason, certainly, that the temperate Joseph is praised, because by mental effort he overcame sexual desire. For when he was young and in his prime for intercourse, by his reason he nullified the frenzy of the passions. Not only is reason proved to rule over the frenzied urge of sexual desire, but also over every desire. Thus the law says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or anything that is your neighbor's." In fact, since the law has told us not to covet, I could prove to you all the more that reason is able to control desires. Just so it is with the emotions that hinder one from justice. Otherwise, how could it be that someone who is habitually a solitary gormanizer, a glutton, or even a drunkard can learn a better way unless reason is clearly lord of the emotions? Thus, as soon as one adopts a way of life in accordance with the law, even though a lover of money, one is forced to act contrary to natural ways and to lend without interest to the needy and to cancel the debt when the seventh year arrives. If one is greedy, one is ruled by the law through reason, so that one neither gleans the harvest nor gathers the last grapes from the vineyard. In all other matters, we can recognize that reason rules the emotions. For the law prevails even over affection for parents, so that virtue is not abandoned for their sakes. It is superior to love for one's wife, so that one rebukes her when she breaks the law. It takes precedence over love for children, so that one punishes them for misdeeds. It is sovereign over the relationship of friends, so that one rebukes friends when they act wickedly. Do not consider it paradoxical when reason, through the law, can prevail even over enmity. The fruit trees of the enemy are not cut down, but one preserves the property of enemies from martyrs and helps raise up what has fallen. It is evident that reason rules even the more violent emotions, lust for power, vainglory, boasting, arrogance, and malice. For the temperate mind repels all these malicious emotions just as it repels anger, for it is sovereign over even this. When Moses was angry with Dathan and Abiram, he did nothing against them in anger, but controlled his anger by reason. For as I have said, the temperate mind is able to get the better of the emotions, to correct some, and to render others powerless. Why else did Jacob, our most wise father, censure the households of Simeon and Levi for their irrational slaughter of the entire tribe of the Shechemites, saying, "Cursed be their anger"? For if reason could not control anger, he would not have spoken thus. Now, when God fashioned human beings, he planted in them emotions and inclinations, but at the same time, he enthroned them among the senses as a sacred governor over them all. To the mind he gave the law, and the one who is subject to this will rule a kingdom that is temperate, just, good, and courageous. How is it then, one might say, that if reason is master of the emotions, it does not control forgetfulness and ignorance? 4th Maccabees Chapter 3. But this argument is entirely ridiculous, for it is evident that reason rules not over its own emotions, but over those of the body. No one of us can eradicate that kind of desire, but reason can provide a way for us not to be enslaved by desire. No one of us can eradicate anger from the mind, but reason can help to deal with anger. No one of us can eradicate malice, but reason can fight at our side so that we are not overcome by malice. For reason does not uproot the emotions, but is their antagonist. Now this can be explained more clearly by the story of King David's thirst. David had been attacking the Philistines all day long, and together with the soldiers of his nation had killed many of them. Then, when evening fell, he came, sweating and quite exhausted, to the royal tent, around which the whole army of our ancestors had encamped. Now all the rest were at supper. But the king was extremely thirsty, and though springs were plentiful there, he could not satisfy his thirst from them. But a certain irrational desire for the water in the enemy's territory tormented and inflamed him, undid and consumed him. When his guards complained bitterly because of the king's craving, two staunch young soldiers, respecting the king's desire, armed themselves fully and taking a pitcher, climbed over the enemy's ramparts. Eluding the sentinels at the gates, they went searching throughout the enemy camp and found the spring, and from it boldly brought the king a drink. But David, though he was burning with thirst, considered it an altogether fearful danger to his soul to drink what was regarded as equivalent to blood. Therefore, opposing reason to desire, he poured out the drink as an offering to God. For the temperate mind can conquer the drive of the emotions and quench the flames of frenzied desires. It can overthrow bodily agonies even when they are extreme, and by nobility of reason spurn all domination by the emotions. The present occasion now invites us to a narrative demonstrative of temperate reason. At a time when our ancestors were enjoying profound peace because of their observance of the law and were prospering, so that even Seleucus Nicanor, king of Asia, had both appropriated money to them for the temple service and recognized their commonwealth. Just at that time, certain persons attempted a revolution against the public harmony and caused many and various disasters. Okay. 4th Maccabees Chapter 4. Now there was a certain Simon, a political opponent of the noble and good man Onias, who then held the high priesthood for life. When despite all manner of slander he was unable to injure Onias in the eyes of the nation, he fled the country with the purpose of betraying. So he came to Apollonius, governor of Syria, Phoenicia, and Cilicia, and said, I have come here because I am loyal to the king's government to report that in the Jerusalem treasuries there are deposited tens of thousands in private funds, which are not the property of the temple, but belong to King Seleucus. When Apollonius learned the details of these things, he praised Simon for his service to the king and went up to Seleucus to inform him of the rich treasure. On receiving authority to deal with this matter, he proceeded quickly to our country, accompanied by the cursed Simon and a very strong military force. He said that he had come with the king's authority to seize the private funds in the treasury. The people indignantly protested his words, considering it outrageous that those who had committed deposits to the sacred treasure should be deprived of them, and did all they could to prevent it. But uttering threats, Apollonius went on to the temple. While the priests, together with women and children, were imploring God in the temple to shield the holy place that was being treated so contemptuously, and while Apollonius was going up with his armed forces to seize the money, angels on horseback with lightning flashing from their weapons appeared from heaven, instilling in them great fear and trembling. Then Apollonius fell down half dead in the temple area that was open to all, stretched out his hands toward heaven, and with tears to the Hebrews to pray for him and propitiate the wrath of the heavenly army. For he said that he had committed a sin deserving of death, and that if he were spared, he would praise the blessedness of the holy place before all people. Moved by these words, the high priest Onias, although otherwise he had scruples about doing so, prayed for him so that the king Seleucus would not suppose that Apollonius had been overcome by human treachery and not by divine justice. So Apollonius, having been saved beyond all expectations, went away to report to the king what had happened to him. When King Seleucus died, his son Antitrust Epiphanes succeeded to the throne, an arrogant and terrible man, who removed Onias from the priesthood and appointed Onias' brother Jason as high priest. Jason agreed that if the office were conferred on him, he would pay the king's 3,660 talents annually. So the king appointed him high priest and ruler of the nation. Jason changed the nation's way of life and altered its form of government in complete violation of the law, so that not only was a gymnasium constructed at the very citadel of our native land, but also the temple service was abolished. The divine justice was angered by these acts and caused Antitrust himself to make war on them. For when he was warring against Ptolemy in Egypt, he heard that a rumor of his death had spread and that the people of Jerusalem had rejoiced greatly. He speedily marched against them. And after he had plundered them, he issued a decree that if any of them were found observing the ancestral law, that they should die. When by means of his decrees he had not been able in any way to put an end to the people's observance of the law, but saw that all his threats and punishments were being disregarded, even to the extent that women, because they had circumcised their sons, were thrown headlong from heights along with their infants, though they had known beforehand that they would suffer this. When I say his decrees were despised by the people, he himself tried through torture to compel everyone in the nation to eat defiling foods and to renounce Judaism. Okay, since these have been very short and we're only 15 minutes in, I'm going to keep reading. I'm going to try to go to 6, but we'll see. Okay, 4th Maccabees Chapter 5. The tyrant Antitrust sitting in state with his counselors on a certain high place, and his armed soldiers standing around him, ordered the guards to seize each and every Hebrew and to compel them to eat pork and food sacrificed to idols. If any were not willing to eat defiling food, they were to be broken on the wheel and killed. When many persons had been rounded up, one man, Eleazar by name, leader of the flock, was brought before the king. He was a man of priestly family, learned in the law, advanced in age, and known to many in the tyrant's court because of his philosophy. When Antitrust saw him, he said, "Before I begin to torture you, old man, I would advise you to save yourself by eating pork. For I respect your age and your gray hairs. Although you have had them for so long a time, it does not seem to me that you are a philosopher when you observe the religion of the Jews. When nature has granted it to us, why should you abhor eating the very excellent meat of this animal? It is senseless not to enjoy delicious things that are not shameful and wrong to spurn the gifts of nature. It seems to me that you will do something even more senseless if, by holding a vain opinion concerning the truth, you continue to despise me to your own hurt. Will you not awaken from your foolish philosophy, dispel your futile reasonings, adopt a mind appropriate to your years, philosophize according to the truth of what is beneficial, and have compassion on your old age by honoring my humane advice? For consider this: if there is some power watching over this religion of yours, it will excuse you from any transgression that arises out of compulsion." When the tyrant urged him in this fashion to eat meat unlawfully, Eleazar asked to have a word. When he had received permission to speak, he began to address the people as follows. We, O Antitrust, waited to govern our lives by the divine law, think that there is no compulsion more powerful than our obedience to the law. Therefore, we consider that we should not transgress in any respect. Even if, as you suppose, our law were not truly divine and we had wrongly held it to be divine, not even so would it be right for us to invalidate our reputation for piety. Therefore, do not suppose that it would be a petty sin if we were to eat defiling food. To transgress the law in matters either small or great is of equal seriousness, for in either case the law is equally despised. You look at our philosophy as though living by it were irrational, but it teaches us self-control so that we master all pleasures and desires, and it also trains us in courage so that we endure any suffering willingly. It instructs us in justice so that in all our dealings we act impartially, and it teaches us piety so that with proper reverence we worship the only living God. Therefore, we do not eat defiling food, for since we believe that the law was established by God, we know that in the nature of things the creator of the world, in giving us the law, has shown sympathy toward us. He has permitted us to eat what will be most suitable for our lives, but he has forbidden us to eat meats that would be contrary to this. It would be tyrannical for you to compel us not only to transgress the law, but also to eat in such a way that you may deride us for eating defiling foods which are most hateful to us. But you shall have no such occasion to laugh at me, nor will I transgress the sacred oaths of my ancestors concerning the keeping of the law, not even if you gouge out my eyes and burn my entrails. I'm not so old and cowardly as to be young and reason on behalf of piety. Therefore, get your torture wheels ready and fan the fire more vehemently. I do not so pity my old age as to break the ancestral law by my own act. I will not play false to you, O law that trained me, nor will I renounce you, beloved self-control. I will not put you to shame, philosophical reason, nor will I reject you, honored priesthood and knowledge of the law. You, O king, shall not defile the honorable mouth of my old age, nor my long life lived lawfully. My ancestors will receive me as pure, as one who does not fear your violence, even to death. You may tyrannize the ungodly, but you shall not dominate my religious principles, either by words or through deeds. 4th Maccabees Chapter 6. When Eleazar in this manner had made eloquence to the exhortations of the tyrant, the guards who were standing by dragged him violently to the instruments of torture. First they stripped the old man though he remained adorned with gracefulness of his piety. After they had tied his arms on each side, they flogged him, while a herald who faced him out, "Obey the king's commands." But the courageous and noble man, like a true Eliezer, was unmoved, as though being tortured in a dream. Yet while the old man's eyes were raised to heaven, his flesh was being torn by scourges, his blood flowing, and his sides were being cut to pieces. Although he fell to the ground because his body could not endure the agonies, he kept his reason unswerving. One of the cruel guards rushed at him and began to kick him in the side to make him get up again after he fell. But he bore the pains and scorned the punishment and endured the torture. Like a noble athlete, the old man, while being beaten, was victorious over his torturers. In fact, with his face bathed in sweat and gasping heavily for breath, he amazed even his torturers by his courageous spirit. At that point, partly out of pity for his old age, partly out of sympathy for their acquaintance with him, partly out of admiration for his endurance, some of the king's retinue came to him and said, "Eliezer, why are you so irrationally destroying yourself through these evil things? We will set before you some cooked meat. Save yourself by pretending to eat pork." But Eliezer, as though more bitterly tormented by his counsel, cried out, "Never may we, the children of Abraham, think so basely. Out of cowardice we feign a role unbecoming to us. For it would be irrational if, having lived in accordance with truth up to old age, and having maintained in accordance with law the reputation of such a life, we should now change our course, and ourselves become a pattern of impiety to the young by setting them an example in eating the defiling food. It would be shameful if we should survive for a little while, and during that time be a laughing stock to all of our cowardice, and be despised by the tyrant as unmanly, but not contending even to death for our divine law. Therefore, children of Abraham, die nobly for your religion. And you, guards of the tyrant, why do you delay? When you saw that he was so courageous in the face of the afflictions, and that he had not been changed by their compassion, the guards brought him to the fire. There they burned him with maliciously contrived instruments, threw him down, and poured stinking liquids into his nostrils. When he was now burned to his very bones and about to expire, he lifted up his head, his eyes to God, and said, "You know, O God, that though I might have saved myself, I am dying in burning torments for the sake of the law. Be merciful to your people, and let our punishment suffice for them. Make my purification and take my life in exchange for theirs." After he said this, the holy man died nobly in his tortures. Even in the tortures of death, he resisted by virtue of reason for the sake of the law. Admittedly, then devout, reason is sovereign over the emotions, for if the emotions had prevailed over reason, we would have testified to their domination. But now that reason has conquered the emotions, we properly attribute to it the power to govern. It is right for us to acknowledge the dominance of reason when it masters even external agonies. It would be ridiculous to deny it. I have proved not only that reason has mastered agonies, but also that it masters pleasures, and in no respect yields to them. All right, let's do chapter 7. Really short. I guess that's why this section is so much longer. Chapter 7. The most skillful pilot, the reason of our father Eliezer steered the ship of religion over the sea of the emotions. And though buffeted by the stormings of the tyrant and overwhelmed by the mighty waves of tortures, in no way did he turn the rudder of religion until he sailed into the haven of a moral victory. No city besieged with many ingenious war machines has ever held out as did the most holy man. Although his sacred life was consumed by tortures and racks, he conquered the besiegers with the shield of his devout reason. For in setting firm like a jutting cliff, our father Eliezer broke the maddening waves of the emotions. O priest, worthy of the priesthood, you neither defiled your sacred teeth nor profaned your soul, which had room only for reverence and purity, by eating defiling foods. O man, in harmony with a law and philosopher of divine life. Such should be those who are administrators of the law, shielding it with their own blood and no sweat and sufferings even to death. You, Father, strengthened our loyalty to the law through your glorious endurance, and you did not abandon the holiness that you praised. But by your deeds you made your words of divine philosophy credible. O aged man, more powerful than tortures, O elder, fiercer than fire, O supreme king over the passions, Eliezer. For just as our father Aaron, armed with a censer, ran through the multitude of the people and conquered the fiery angel, so the descendant of Aaron, Eliezer, though being consumed by the fire, remained unmoved in his reason. Most amazing indeed, though old man, his body no longer tense and firm, his muscles flabby, his sinews feeble, he became young again, in spirit through reason. And by reason like that of Isaac, he rendered the many-headed rack effective. O man of blessed and of venerable gray hair, and of law-abiding life, whom the faithful seal of death has perfected. If therefore, because of piety, an aged man despised tortures even to death, most certainly devout reason is governor of the emotions. Some perhaps might say not all have full command of their emotions, because not all have prudent reason. But as many as attend to religion with a whole heart, these alone are able to control the passions of the flesh, since they believe that they, like our patriarchs, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, do not die to God, but to live to God. No contradiction, therefore, arises when some persons appear to be dominated by their emotions because of their reason. What person who lives as a philosopher by the whole rule of philosophy and trusts in God and knows that it is blessed to endure any suffering for the sake of virtue would not be able to overcome the emotions through godliness? For only the wise and courageous are masters of their emotions. I'm going to read chapter 8 and then we'll be done. Chapter 8. For this is why by following a philosophy in accordance with devout reason, have prevailed over the most painful instruments of torture. For when the tyrant was conspicuously defeated in his first attempt, being unable to compel an aged man to eat defiling foods, then in violent rage he commanded that others of the Hebrew captives be brought, and that any who ate defiling food would be free after eating. But if any were to refuse, they would be tortured even more cruelly. When the tyrant had given these orders, 7 brothers, handsome, modest, noble, and accomplished in every way, were brought before him along with their aged mother. When the tyrant saw them grouped about their mother as a chorus, he was pleased with them, and struck by their appearance and nobility, he smiled at them and summoned them nearer and said, Young men with favorable feelings, I admire each and every one of you, and greatly respect the beauty and the number of such brothers. Not only do I advise you not to display the same madness as that of the old man who has just been tortured, but I also exhort you to yield to me and enjoy my friendship. Just as I am able to punish those who disobey my orders, so I can be a benefactor to those who obey me. Trust me then, and you will have positions of authority in my government if you will renounce the ancestral tradition of your national life. Enjoy your youth by adopting the Greek way of life and by changing your manner of living. But if by disobedience you rouse my anger, you will compel me to destroy each and every one of you with dreadful punishments through tortures. Therefore, take pity on yourselves. Even I, your enemy, have compassion for your youth and handsome appearance. Will you not consider this, that if you disobey, nothing remains for you but to die on the rack? When he had said these things, he ordered the instruments of torture to be brought forward so as to persuade them out of fear of defiling food. When the guards had placed before them wheels and joint dislocators, rack and hooks, and catapults, and cauldrons, braziers, and thumb screws, and iron claws, and wedges, and the tyrant resumed speaking. Be afraid, young fellows. Whatever justice you revere will be merciful to you when you transgress under compulsion. But when they had heard the inducements and saw the dreadful devices, not only were they not afraid, but they also opposed the tyrant with their own philosophy, and by their right reasoning nullified his enemy. Let us consider, on the other hand, what arguments might have been used if some of them had been cowardly and unmanly. Would they not have been the following? O wretches that we are, and so senseless, since the king has summoned and exhorted us to accept kind treatment if we obey him, why do we take pleasure in vain and venture upon a disobedience that brings death? O men and brothers, should we not fear the instruments of torture and consider the threats of torments, and give up this opinion and this arrogance that threatens to destroy us? Let us take pity on our youth and have compassion on our mother's age, and let us seriously consider that if we disobey, we are dead. Also, divine justice will excuse us for fearing the king when we are under compulsion. Why do we banish ourselves from this most pleasant life and deprive ourselves of this delightful world? Let us not struggle against compulsion or take hollow pride in being put to the rack. Not even the law itself would arbitrarily put us to death for fearing the instruments of torture. Why does such contentiousness excite us and such a fatal stubbornness please us, when we can live in peace if we obey the king? But the youths, though about to be tortured, neither said any of these things, nor even seriously considered them, for they were contemptuous of the emotions and sovereign over agonies, so that as the tyrant had ceased counseling them to eat defiling food, all with one voice together, as from one mind, said. Seriously, I was going to end there. Okay, we will pick up with 4th Maccabees Chapter 9 next time, guys. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.